Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome to the bonus movie marathon. Today we're talking The Wind in the Willows. This is part of a series I'm doing over on my other podcast, Every Version Ever. There are a couple of Disney films included in that series. Check out our previous episode on The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad for the first one. And then there's also a live-action one that I had no idea was Disney until I started this series. But aside from those, I thought I'd throw in a couple of bonus animated versions, definitely not Disney, but movies aimed at that audience when they came out. Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome to an episode I've wanted to do for quite some time. This is a movie I grew up with, 1995's The Wind in the Willows. For kids who grew up in the 90s, I'm sure you'll know, when your family owns just a handful of VHS tapes, you watch those ones to death. And this was one of those for me and my brothers. I never fully read the book until I started this podcast series, but this version is why I love this story so much. From the background art to the character design to the voiced cast to the music, this is such a perfect encapsulation of the story. It's not a perfect adaptation, as I've discovered now having read the book myself, but it gets the vibes right, and that's one of the most important parts of adapting something for me. Joining me for this episode is my cousin Sarah. She is also a huge fan of this story, not because she grew up watching it. I don't think she'd ever seen this version until we watched it for this podcast, but she loves the book, and when I started working on a series on Wind in the Willows, I knew I wanted her to join me for this one. And not just this one, but the sequel, which I had never seen, and as a kid I didn't even know existed, so it was interesting to see how that held up to the original. But before we get to that, let's talk about my version of The Wind in the Willows, the 1995 British animated version, produced coincidentally by one of Sarah's favorite filmmakers, John Coates, who did one of her favorite Christmas films, The Snowman, as well as one of her favorite animated series, The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends. Once she discovered that this one was by the same person who made those, she was excited to watch this one as well. This is the version I grew up with, so
lucky you.
Other than an excerpted chapter that was in like a childcraft book, this was my main exposure to this story as a kid.
I don't feel like I had a lot of exposure to it as a kid. I might have been a teenager or in my 20s when I got the book. But I've had plenty of exposure since then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember some sort of horrifying live version on PBS, and other than that, I don't think I watched much animated to do with it.
Okay.
But yeah, if you were going to be raised with an animated version, this seems like one of the best ones that you could be raised on.
Yeah, I really liked it, watching it through again. It's one of those things where you start watching like, is this going to hold up to my memories? And I think it did.
Good. No, and well, you got me on board pretty quickly because it's John Coates, who also did The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends and Snowman, both of which I love.
I noticed there was a lot of people, like when I was doing the research for this, there was a lot of people in the voice cast who also did voices on The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends.
The mole is Timmy Willie. I recognize that.
Yep. Well, we can go through the cast. We have Vanessa Redgrave as the narrator.
Which I loved that.
Yes.
She was wonderful. And
I was trying to think, like, where else do I know Vanessa Redgrave from? Because I know the name. Like, she's, like, you hear the voice and, like, it's Vanessa Redgrave. I was going through her IMDb and was like, is this movie why I know her?
Oh, maybe.
I saw things that, I vaguely recognized. She was in Mission Impossible and Cars 2.
Really?
But, like, I don't remember who she was in either of those, and I'm not even sure I've seen the first Mission Impossible movie.
I've never even watched the whole thing of Letters to Juliet, but I loved her on that movie.
Is that movie I watched part of with you? I don't remember if we ever finished it.
I don't know, but she was lovely on there. And she does get a happy ending. So...
Oh, that's good.
Yes. So having her translate over to this... I mean, there's a part on there where she is reading a letter, and it's really, really nice, and maybe that helps in my mind to translate her over to this, where she is the narrator. And yeah, she's cozy.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that they're setting it up in that era with that wonderful steamboat that would be so fun to ride on.
I was thinking it would be fun to ride on that thing, too.
And I think there's a phonograph, and yeah, it's just very charming.
Yeah. I was kind of wondering if maybe that opening was inspired by the various versions of Alice in Wonderland that have the boat ride.
I mean, so much of the book is on the river that it just makes sense for them to be on the river at the beginning.
Yeah.
But there aren't any steamboats. It's just a very charming touch.
The kids, when I first saw them, I was like you could tell they were not professional actors.
I mean, for this, it's not like they had to do an hour's worth of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're setting it up and capping off the story, so it's not like they had any really hammy dramatics that they needed to go into, and they were not doing like a youth group reading of their lines. And if some people will know what I'm talking about, like that you're holding the sheet and this is how we're talking through the story, and it doesn't matter what emotions we're supposed to convey. We're reading it off of the sheet.
Yes.
So, no, it was better than that.
Well, I did think it was interesting. The only one who went on to do anything more was the boy, who is Tim Storton as Edward, which I didn't remember any of their names. I had to look the names up on IMDb. But he has a pretty long IMDb page, but it all seems to be like tiny roles. And he seems to be like a staple actor in the Thomas the Tank Engine series. But I thought it was kind of hilarious. His most recent role was as Earring Magic Ken in the Barbie movie.
Really?
I think he was one of the misfit dolls that lived with Weird Barbie.
Oh. I'm having maybe a vague remembrance.
I just thought that was kind of hilarious.
So he played that character. Yeah. Oh, now I want to know which character that. Oh, come on.
I could do a Google search.
Yeah, I want to see. I want to see what young Edward grew up to be. And if he's playing Ken, then he must have been eating his veggies or something. Oh my. Fun.
Yeah, that's basically it for the live action cast. For the characters, the main characters, Alan Bennett is Mole, and as you already said, Timmy Willie in the World of Beatrix Potter and Friends.
One of my favorite characters. So cute.
And I had to look all these people up, of course. Some of them I thought I might recognize the voice, but for him, the biggest surprise was that he was the mouse in the 1966 Jonathan Miller BBC Alice in Wonderland. The black and white one.
Timmy Willie was?
Yeah.
So he's basically very good with the cute animal role.
Apparently.
The only other voice that I recognized was Badger's, but carry on, maybe I'll know somebody.
Michael Palin as Ratty. He was in Monty Python, and he also voiced the son in the Terry Gilliam Wind in the Willows, which is probably the live-action one you saw.
I might get more out of it as an adult, but it just looked so wrong growing up.
And then, of course, the biggest name was Sir Michael Gambon as Badger, who the first thing that jumped out at me was he played Franklin Bean in Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Sure.
But I also know him as Kazran Sardik in the Doctor Who Christmas Carol, which is basically the Scrooge role for that episode.
Okay. I know him from, I think, Cranford.
Yeah, that was one.
Opposite Judi Dench, and then he dies tragically. And he ate peas with a knife. No, he didn't die from that. He didn't die from that. It was just a random part of the...
Well, I'd also forgotten that he was Mr. Lawrence in the 2017 Little Women miniseries.
I also remember him from, I think, Wives and Daughters.
Mm.
And he was like a bigoted old man, and the main character was very sweet and patient with him, and he came around And it was lovely. I mean, just, yeah, she was saint. She was a saint towards him.
Yeah, he has a very long list of credits, a lot of which I actually recognize, but that's what stood out to me the most was some recent things we'd watched.
If you're working with him, you're probably making something cool.
And then Rick Mayall as Mr. Toad. And the thing that jumped out at me first was he played Prince Froglip in The Princess and the Goblin, which I reviewed on the podcast last year.
Did I watch? I probably didn't.
You didn't watch that one with me. And he was also in Blackadder, and he was also somebody who was in The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends.
What was the thing that we watched with all the goblins?
Was it live action or animated?
It was animated, like from the 80s or something. And it was like maybe a George
maybe I did watch it with you.
Like
I did watch that with you. I didn't do the
Yeah.
podcast with you, but I watched it with you.
Okay.
That was it, yeah.
Yeah. So Toad was in that one.
Yes.
Which character?
Prince Froglip, the Prince of the Goblins.
Okay, so another nasty reptilian creature.
Yes. And in The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends, he played Tom Thumb, which doesn't mean anything to me, but you've seen the show, so you might know the name.
Which episode?
I don't know, I just wrote down Tom Thumb in The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends.
Oh, I know. I think he was one of the Two Bad Mice, which they did a dual episode with the Two Bad Mice and the Town and the Country Mouse with Timmy Willie. So they were basically on the same episode together.
Mm. And then the last three are a bit smaller. The person who played Otter was N. Rytel, and he did a ton of voices in The World of Peter Rabbit and Friends, like so many that I didn't even bother writing a name down.
Oh.
And then Emma Chambers as the jailer's daughter. She was Alice Tinker in The Vicar of Dibley. As soon as I heard the voice, I recognized it. And then the barge woman was played by Judy Cornwell, who played Daisy in Keeping Up Appearances.
Really?
Yes.
My brain did not register that.
It did to me. She's perfect for that kind of a character.
Mm.
I don't know if it registered for you. It's probably just because this is a nostalgic childhood thing, but to me, the opening music is like iconic.
I mean, you're watching for like 3 seconds before you recognize that you're watching something cozy.
Mm-hmm.
So between the atmosphere and the music, It's lovely. And it's nice that they set it up as a narration before the animation. They could go right into the animation, but
yeah,
that added another layer of cozy.
Yeah. What did you think of the art style of the whole thing?
Really nice.
It seemed like an illustration to me.
Didn't they have kind of the pencil stroke thing that you would have along with this kind of like the snowman?
It kind of seemed sort of mixed media. Like I could see pencils. I thought I could see crayons. There was maybe some paint.
It wasn't as sketchy as the snowman.
I think the snowman was like entirely crayon, and this wasn't. This had more stuff being used.
It was very nicely done.
Yeah.
It's interesting because at the beginning you have him digging his way out, but then when he comes back with Ratty, it's like they come in through his little courtyard. So, what was that?
The courtyard seemed to be underground.
Yes. So why didn't he go out that way in the beginning?
I don't know.
Questions that are slightly irrelevant. But they included the whitewashing.
Yes.
And they included onion sauce.
Onion sauce. Onion sauce.
Yes. Which I believe is what rabbits were served with. So it was very insulting. Because the rabbits were trying to bar his passage. And he was basically saying nonsense, and this is what you're eating with. It's one of those little things that, like, if you didn't have the footnote in the book, it's not like I grew up eating rabbit.
I don't think I've ever eaten rabbit. But yeah, this starts with the spring cleaning and Mo leaving his house to go and meet Ratty. Because I don't know if they...
in the book, you get the impression that they just didn't know each other, that this is them becoming friends.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, it's kind of hazy, like they could know each other, but do they?
The way they talk seems like they do, but also he has no idea how to get to his house, and he's never been in a boat before. So, I don't know.
It's like in the book they become friends really quickly, but you don't get the impression that they knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's giving his whole speech about everything in the picnic basket, and they made the artistic choice of Otter showing up to the picnic in a little swimsuit. And
with baby Portly.
Which in the book Portly wasn't with him, but it makes sense to introduce the character then, since he's going to reappear later and establish that it's his son.
Yeah.
And Badger did have a grumpy cameo at that picnic. And then that whole little upset with the boat, like they stayed pretty like they did a good job conveying Mole's character in this one, and how he'll, in the book I think you get even more of a sense of how foolhardy he is grabbing these oars, but I think they did a good job with this scene. And one thing that that doesn't happen in the book that I recall, but that makes sense in this movie, is how he tells him, you better stay on with me and I'll teach you about, boating and things. And it sets the story up nicely for him to stay with him.
You also had a couple brief scenes on the river there with Otter telling them about Toad, who seems to be currently obsessed with boats. And then when Portly jumps into the river to go after a dragonfly, I love the way you see the little shadow swimming under the river, and then the dragonfly gets sucked downwards.
Sometimes it's little touches.
And the story is told by seasons, so that was spring, and now we're moving into summer, where Mole has stayed with Rat for a while, and they decide to go visit Toad. And I thought it was funny because they get to Toad Hall and they see this boathouse full of boats, and Ratty seems to be annoyed that he's given up boats, and he asks him about it. He goes, "Oh, pooh, boating? Gave that up a long time ago."
Naturally. And it seems kind of obscure for them to include the cart thing, but it always sets, anytime that's included, which since I have not watched a zillion versions, but I would imagine that they have included it in a bunch, it just sets it up for his car obsession. And they did a good job with that. Yeah.
Basically going on a early 1900s road trip.
Yes.
Which actually seems like a fun idea. I liked that cart. It seemed like it had a good stash of stuff.
It was slow camping.
Yeah. And Rat doesn't want to go, but Mole kind of convinces him. And I'm not sure how long they travel with Toad.
I think in the book you get the impression that Rat already knows that this is a load of nonsense, and he already knows Toad well enough, but he could see that Mole was interested, and so he's doing it for Mole's sake. And no, it's not long-lived in the book or in this movie.
Well, I felt like it was long enough that Mole could sense that Rat didn't want to be there, because they have that conversation, and Rat basically decides, no, we should stay with Toad because we have to watch out for him.
You already have it set up early on that just how nice, like, they have their, moments, their little foibles, but just how loyal and kind Rat and Mole are to each other in general is really, it's a nice part of the story.
Yeah. But then after that conversation, the next day is when you get the motor car, causing them to have a crash. And you've got Rat running after the car, screaming after them. And then Mole is trying to calm the horse. And Toad is just sitting there, his eyes glazing over and getting hypnotized.
Obsessed.
And he doesn't, at least on screen, he doesn't immediately go out and get a car. You go back with Mole and Rat, and you've got a scene with Rat starting to write poetry, and Mole kind of accidentally insulting his poetry.
They set this up for him to be... Like, they did a good job with this because they were trying... Because there's this whole passage in the book talking to the birds that are going to be going south, and then he runs into this sea rat who fills his head with all of these adventures that he's had, and then he's in this daze like he needs to leave too. And they bypass that by having him get grumpy at Mole and long for an adventure, and like he's going to go off in a daze and have this adventure, and then Mole talking him out of it very briefly about, you know, the lovely things that he would be missing. Mm-hmm. It's like 1 or 2 chapters in the book, but this
was a brief scene.
But it was nice that they included all of the lovely animation to go with these adventures that he thought about having.
Yeah.
They did a good job with that. They just creatively compacted it.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the scene talking to the swallows that are talking about leaving. But it's okay that they didn't have it.
I was thinking about that, not the swallows in particular, but I was wondering, I think I was like halfway through the second movie, I was like, are there any birds in this world? Like talking birds?
Yes. In the book there are. But yeah, in here I don't know. Maybe not.
I guess not. I don't remember seeing any talking birds. You do see birds, like in this scene, you've got birds heading south for the winter. That's what starts his imagination about going south for adventures. And then you see birds in the jail too. They build a nest and lay eggs.
But no, it's a whole conversation.
But yeah, that whole thing ends with Mole telling him he can't leave. He still has so much to teach him, and he still hasn't met Badger, which transitions to basically the end of fall, the beginning of winter. They still haven't met Badger, and Mole is getting impatient. Mm-hmm. So he decides to go out and find Badger himself, going to the Wild Wood.
He was sneaky about that in the book, and naive.
Mm-hmm. And his journey through the woods reminded me of the scene with Snow White running through the forest, with imagining that she's seeing creatures in the trees, and... Except
he is seeing, like... He is surrounded.
Well, he is surrounded by weasels, and you do hear them, but like there's at least one where he sees this big grove of things that looks like a pig monster, and then it switches, so you can tell it's just trees.
Sure.
But that's the main thing that reminded me of Snow White, was him imagining that he sees a big monster, and It's not really a monster.
No, they did a good job with all the little noises and...
Yeah, the little whistles. Yeah, Rat wakes up after he's gone and hears something from the woods and goes after him. And he eventually finds him hiding in a hollow tree, saying he's exhausted, they can't leave now. So they wait, but then it starts snowing. I don't know, were they trying to leave before it got too deep? Because to me it was just like, you're in a hollow tree, just stay there until the storm is over.
I'd have to look in the book, but it may have already been snowing before. Oh shoot, I'd have to look when the snow began. Okay, it looks like this was pretty accurate to the book of having him find him and Mole needing to rest and then discovering snow. So I was thinking that it was already going, but it doesn't really look that way.
But yeah, they head out into the snow, and Mole ends up tripping over something and I guess cutting his leg. But it turns out to be the door stopper, or door scraper.
And I recognize from this scene, Mole not getting it, and being grumpy, and then Rat being short with him after Mole is praised. Like, this is so accurate to the book. It might even be word for word accurate, this whole conversation. So they did a really good job with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they discover that they are outside Badger's house, so they ring his bell, and he is at first grumpy, but then he invites them in.
Accurate. And they did this scene a little bit differently than the book, but they did a good job. They did not capture the code. It would be so hard if you did it with the narrator overlaying the exact words of the book for this scene, at least some of the scene, to set the stage, then you might capture the coziness of it.
Mm-hmm.
But without that, it's hard to do that.
Rat and Mole tell Badger about Toad, and they want to have Badger come back with them and help him see sense, but Badger doesn't want to do it until spring. It didn't seem like they stayed with him very long, but I would have thought that they would have waited until...
They stayed the night. They stayed the night, and there was a scene with two hedgehogs that had, I think, run into trouble getting to school, and they were there having breakfast, and Otter shows up, and there's this whole eloquent speech about nature that he goes on, and then Mole's off with Badger discussing his house, and there's a whole wonderful talk about the rise and fall of civilizations. Not included in this version. It's okay, just read the book. But no, the time at Badger's house is it's such a great part of the book. And yeah, it would be hard to capture without some... the part about the rise and fall of civilizations is Badger talking, so it would just be a matter of, are you going to have the patience to include that?
Mm-hmm. I got the feeling that this, obviously this is shorter than the book, but it felt like it went by very quickly. And it is only an hour and 10 minutes, so it did go by very quickly, but I'm sure that there was a lot of stuff in the book that they had to cut out for time.
And then I think they transitioned directly into the scene of trying to find Mole's house.
Yeah, they left and it seemed like they just went out in the snowstorm again.
And see, the thing is, that's a whole separate chunk in the book. I think maybe they've been, and I'd have to look at it, but I think maybe they had just been off tramping or doing their own thing on an entirely different day. And you have this, it's its own chapter, and it's like a short story within the book of how they go through a human village. And then they're wanting to get home, and I think it starts with the scurrying of sheep, and there's this whole discussion about this parrot that they can see behind a window blind or something. And just all of these little things. And on the way home, he catches the scent of his place. But it makes sense for an animated version to just smoosh it together. Mm-hmm. And this one, they didn't have the carolers. It was still nice the way they did the scene, but the carolers are a very cute part of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they head out and Mole catches this whiff of his house and starts to feel really homesick, so they decide to go find his home. And do they stay there until spring in the book? It seemed like that's what they were doing.
They just stayed the night. Okay. As far as I know.
I also noticed that when they're going through his courtyard, there's a fountain with fish.
Yes.
I was like, how did they survive almost a year without anyone feeding them?
It's the magic of the book. I don't know. And they're underground, so...
Yeah, in winter.
I don't know.
Are they in the book? Does he have fish in the book?
Time to find the passage. Suddenly, without giving warning, he dived, but the rat was on the alert and promptly followed him down the tunnel to which his unerring nose had faithfully led him. It was close and airless, and the earthy smell was strong, and it seemed a long time to Rat ere the passage ended, and he could stand erect and stretch and shake himself. The Mole struck a match, and by its light the Rat saw that they were standing in an open space, neatly swept and sanded underfoot, and directly facing them was Mole's little front door, with Mole End painted in Gothic lettering over the bell-pull at the side. Mole reached down a lantern from a nail on the wall and lit it, and the Rat, looking round him, saw that they were in a sort of forecourt. A garden seat stood on one side of the door, and on the other a roller, for the Mole, who was a tidy animal when at home, could not stand having his ground kicked up by other animals into little runs that ended in earth-heaps. On the walls hung wire baskets with ferns in them, alternating with brackets carrying plaster statuary. Is it Garibaldi? Garibaldi, and the infant Samuel, and Queen Victoria, and other heroes of modern Italy. Down on one side of the forecourt ran a little ran a skittle alley with benches along it and little wooden tables marked with rings that hinted at beer mugs. In the middle was a small round pond containing goldfish, and surrounded by a cockle-shell border. Out of the center of the pond rose a fanciful erection clothed in more cockle-shells, and topped by a large silvered glass ball that reflected everything all wrong and had a very pleasing effect. So when you look at this animated scene, even though they're not explaining all the things, they did a pretty good job of, like, they were trying to show his little forecourt.
Yeah. It seemed very fancy and well kept for something that hadn't seen anyone in almost a year. Well, eventually they go back to Rats, and in the spring, Badger comes so they can go confront Toad. And apparently Badger has heard that a new motor car is scheduled to be delivered that morning. So they go to restrain Toad, and they turn away the car, and I love the scene where they've got him inside, and he's pretending to be like all contrite and remorseful, and he solemnly promises that the next time I see a motor car, off I go in it!
They did a good job of capturing the essence of this scene, because he was briefly repentant, then unrepentant, and then they were trying to watch over him and keep him stuck at home, but they had him escape very quickly in this version, which is fine. It was funny the way they did it. That's like one of my favorite scenes from when I was a kid. Just them locking him in his room, and he's like having a literal screaming tantrum. Then he gets an idea and starts giggling evilly to himself, tying bed sheets together and jumping out the window. And then they made it like he was trying to get away from them by stealing the car, whereas in the book, I think it was just his stupid temptation to mess around with the car. But because didn't they have it more like he was trying to get away from...
Basically, yeah. He's fleeing towards town, and they're just catching up to him, and they see him jump into a car, and you hear somebody yelling that that's their car, and he crashes immediately. And then you get the scene in the court where he's sentenced to 12 months in prison for his stealing of the car. But apparently his furious driving is even worse than that, so he gets 3 years for that. But then cheeking the police is the most serious crime in this world, apparently. So he gets 15 years.
This was a very hammy scene in the book and in this version. And then rounding it up to 20. Just
to be on the safe side. And I don't know how long he spends in prison, but it has to be a while, because you see birds building a nest on his window and laying eggs and everything. So I'm going to guess he's there until at least summer, like several months anyway. But during all this time, you have the jailer's daughter taking pity on him and kind of trying to befriend him, but he's kind of oblivious to people being nice to him.
In the book, he figures that she has feelings for him. And I think he kind of regretted the gap in their class.
That was not in this version. That's hilarious.
Like, she's just trying to be nice to an animal. I think that talking about the jail scene, I keep thinking about buttered toast now.
I do remember watching that scene as a kid and thinking that buttered toast looked amazing.
It wasn't even anime.
And it was really messily and violently eaten by Mr. Toad.
Maybe it made you want to go messily and violently eat some buttered toast.
Maybe. Also, the way they animated the steam smells and all the little rats like sniffing and going after the steam. They just made it seem so delicious. You also had a little scene where he's in jail where I think he's like making friends with a group of non-sentient rats. They seem to be just like regular rats. And he's like telling them a story of what he's done. And he's like admitting that what he did was terrible and his sentence was just, but he's also very proud of himself.
I think, yeah, maybe especially for the cheek. How creative that was or whatever.
And you have interspersed with all the scenes in prison, you've got I think you said it was taken from elsewhere in the book, where Portly has gone missing. So Mole and Ratty are rowing up and down the river trying to find him, and they eventually find him being looked after by Pan.
Mm-hmm. Well, they never see Pan. Well, do they?
I guess that could be up to interpretation. They definitely notice and talk about seeing his footprints.
Right.
But at least from what we can see, he's in front of them and he's hiding Portly, petting him for a little bit, and then he disappears.
It's a weird chapter. And that's another one that's almost a short story within the book. And that's this idea that Pan is the guardian of little animals. I don't know why Kenneth Grahame made this chapter. It doesn't, like, it's very poetic, but I don't fully get it.
You could kind of tell that it had been forced into this scene. The way they talk about Toad in the conversations with Portly, it's just kind of like they're jumping back.
I don't think they talk about Toad at all in that chapter. Like, it's its own thing, kind of like the one with him going to his home again. Mm-hmm. It's like it's its own thing.
Yeah. I get the feeling that when they were putting together this movie, somebody just really liked the Pan chapter and wanted to find a way to fit it into the movie.
Maybe because you can totally tell the story without it.
Yeah. So you have to find a way to make it make sense, and I don't know that they did a perfectly good job of making it make sense within the story of Toad going to jail.
I can't remember now. Were they trying to talk a bunch about Toad during this, or...
It was like they kept changing the subject. Like they would talk about Toad, and I think Rat had a line about save your pity for Otter, his son's gone missing, or something like that.
Right, they were weaving it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, and then the whole, like, he's hearing the voice of Pan, which Rat did hear it better. Like Mole, I don't know how much Mole could hear it. He could sense Pan, but...
Yeah, after that, you have the jailer's daughter coming to Toad with a plan to break him out of jail. She talks about her very poor aunt, who, if they help him, they don't actually say, like, she starts whispering in his ear, but you get the idea that, like, if you give my aunt some money, we'll help you get out of jail. Mm-hmm. So her aunt is a washerwoman, so they disguise Toad as her aunt so that he can get out of prison without anybody noticing.
Which in the book, I think she insisted on being tied up like she had been...
Oh, really?
Yes. Like, yeah. Yeah.
I wondered about that.
They had, you know, she wanted, like, it wasn't going to be very convincing anyway, but she wanted it to look like...
Because when I was watching it this time, I was like, so what are the people who run the prison going to think if Toad just disappears? Are they going to, like, come after the jailer's daughter? But if the part of their plan was to make it look like he had tied up...
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Although it just adds another to the long list of crimes that they could get him on later.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he flees prison and he hitches a ride on a train, and you meet the engine driver he seems like a nice guy, but when he finds out about Toad, he's not liking the idea of helping him, but then they're being chased by the police and he doesn't like the idea of the police telling him what to do. Mm-hmm. So he helps Toad. That cracked me up.
In the end, it is a toad.
So he basically has him jump off the train at the last second when they go through a tunnel so that he can escape. And the next morning, Toad comes across the barge woman. There's this big barge being towed by a horse, and she offers to give him a lift in exchange for washing some clothes, which he fails at hilariously, and she's laughing at him. And I love it whenever Toad gets outraged. I think I've said it before. I don't remember if it was in the episode we did a while back with Nikki or if I just said it. But, like, Toad is the kind of character that I love watching on a movie. But if I knew him in real life, I would hate this person.
Sure. I don't think I hate him in the first one. I'll save that for the sequel.
I wondered.
It's like, in the book, he is very foolish and silly and obnoxious and everything, but in the end, he is a fairly good-hearted creature. And he does change, which we'll get to later.
But yeah, he's insulting the barge woman, and he reveals himself to be Mr. Toad, which she is repulsed by. Just the fact that he's a toad, she is repulsed. So she throws him overboard. So then he goes and frees her horse.
Which is, yeah, that's a funny part in the book. What they don't include is the gypsy. The versions that we've watched so far, they have not included the gypsy. Because I think he might actually sell the horse for breakfast to a gypsy.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, in this one, he just takes the horse and rides it away, leaving her stranded in the river.
Unless he trades it for another horse and breakfast. I can't remember. I'd have to look. But yeah, there's a whole thing with a gypsy that apparently is easy to edit out. You can include Pan, but forget about the gypsy.
So he's riding this horse back home, and on the way he sees the judge who sentenced him to prison. So he freaks out, and it seems like he's feigning a heat stroke or something. So they stop to help him, and in return he hijacks and steals the judge's car.
The book is almost as silly, because in the book it's the guy that he originally stole the car from. Like, what? Did you just have animosity towards him for actually turning you into the police? What is going on with this? So yes, very foolish Toad.
Mm-hmm. And then he crashes again. And then you have the line that I feel like is one that my brother's repeated a lot when he sees the police coming and he yells, "The bobbies! Catch me if you can!"
The bobbies!
And he ends up swimming to Rat and Mole. So when he gets back to Rats, they reveal that Toad Hall has been taken over by the Weasels, and then Badger reveals that he's there as well and tells him he has a plan to reclaim Toad Hall using an underground passage that Toad's father had told Badger about, but would never have dreamt of telling Toad about.
Mm-hmm.
So they sneak into Toad Hall, and this whole scene was a lot shorter than I remembered, but I think I was confusing it with the Disney version, because at some point I saw the Disney version. I think I must have conflated the two, because the battle didn't seem to last very long in this version.
Okay.
I think it was longer in the Disney one.
In the book, they get it over with pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they drive the Weasels out, reclaim the house, and then immediately start planning a party.
And this is fairly accurate in that they're trying to curb his arrogance straight off, and he sings a song to himself about how great he is.
Yeah.
Which is pretty accurate to the book, except for that's where, in the book, he has the party and, like, his friends or neighbors or whoever are expecting him to be more grandiose. And he chooses to be modest, and I think it was a bit of a downer to them, but after that he does choose to be more modest. Mm-hmm. Whereas in this one, they left it wide open. It's like he hadn't learned a single thing. And next thing you know, he's in an airplane.
Yes, his only modesty was there because of Badger forced it.
Yeah, whereas in the book, his character actually does mature and develop, which is the way I would have liked for them to cap this off. Instead of, oh great, here we go.
For me, I didn't even know that, like when I was a kid, I did not know that there was a sequel. So this seemed like an okay ending. Like, I don't think you have an airplane in this movie.
No.
It's the very beginning of the next one. So it kind of ends with him entering the banquet hall to wild applause. And then you go back to the real world. So, yeah, when I was a kid, I had no idea that there was a sequel to this. It was just, this was the only movie we had.
You were spared.
But yeah, we go back to Vanessa Redgrave with her grandchildren. having a picnic on the riverbank before going back to the boat. And she explains that Toad was forced to send gifts and money to everybody that had helped him, and that the 4 animals became legends to the weasels, who used them as cautionary tales to their misbehaving children. That cracked me up. And then over the credits, you get some voiceovers from characters from earlier in the story. And it didn't strike me as anything when I was a kid, because I didn't know there was a sequel, but at the end, you hear the youngest boy ask what adventures they had next.
Oh.
So they were already planning a sequel when they made this.
Why did you do it, John Coates?
So yeah, that's the 1995 animated Wind in the Willows.
Definitely recommend.
Yeah, I really liked this one. I think I would still like it even if I hadn't grown up with it. It's a really good version.
If I am saying it's a good version and I love the book so much, hopefully that means something.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up with it and I love the book, so if I wanted to be a stickler over something, if it was genuinely bad, but it can be added to, if you wanted a John Coates collection along with the Snowman and Beatrix Potter, it'd be a nice one in there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, out of the things that we've watched, this is one that I could put in top recommendations across all genres. Okay, shall we get on to this monstrosity?
It had some moments that I enjoyed, but on the whole, I kept scratching my head like, this was a choice.
Okay, so I love you, John Coates. I started watching this thinking, okay, this is, I don't know, kind of like Tales from Avonlea. It's the characters, it's a total spin. It's not the Ellen Montgomery stories, but it's still nice. And then I got partway through and it's like, what the heck? Oh, this is so... Oh! Like, I don't want to be mean, because it's John Coates, and I want to be a nice person, but this was a mistake.
Well, I didn't realize that this was based on another book.
Really?
Apparently, there's an English novelist named William Horwood who's done a ton of books. Like, he was born in the 40s, and I think he's still alive, and he's still writing.
This was fan fiction.
That's what I thought as I was watching. I was like, this basically seems like fan fiction.
Leave it alone. I mean, this is what you do with the fan fiction? You're killing everybody off and starting fires? Or one fire. But anyway.
Yeah, he was born in 44. He's 79, so...
And he felt like chaos.
He wrote 4, in the 90s, he wrote 4 sequels to Wind in the Willows. Willows in Winter, Toad Triumphant, The Willows and Beyond, and The Willows at Christmas.
The Willows at Christmas sounds cozy, but I don't know if it would be.
I guess it depends on how closely they stuck to the book with this movie.
I love the little world of him being with Rat, and so he's gone back to his house. They're still friends or whatever. And then you have this random nephew, and then this whole...
That was the first head-scratching moment. Well, no, not a bad head-scratching moment. I was like, okay, a nephew? Okay.
That nobody is that excited to have around, apparently.
This is like when they just give random Disney characters a nephew.
What happened in this guy's life that he wanted to write in a nephew that nobody really wanted around?
That was also confusing, because they say at the beginning that he was recently orphaned.
Yeah.
Although he sounds like he's an adult. So, but he needs somewhere to live, okay, fine. But then it seems like everybody's annoyed with him. Like they don't want him there.
Pick one. Either he's vacationing and he's annoying, or he's an orphan and you need to be compassionate. Just pick one. This will be a more lively episode, probably because of all of the complaining that I have to do about this. And, okay, so it's Portly, right?
Yeah.
Shows up like there's some kind of an emergency, and then the nephew gives him too much booze to revive him or whatever, and then he doesn't get the message out properly because he's going off into a drunken sleep. And so Mole goes off like there's an emergency, which this seems fairly accurate to life. There was no emergency. This is a stupid mix-up. And then he ends up, crashing through an icy river, which at night. But no, he's not dead.
But he left a will. I was like, when did he write a will?
And why would you take it with you?
Yes.
Leave it in a convenient place at the cottage for someone to find. Don't leave it in a hollow tree to be found 50 years later or whatever.
The will was my first indication that this is a downgrade from the first movie.
Okay, I think you caught on faster than I did.
With the will, it's like, okay, they're going out to search for him. Oh, he just randomly left a will when he went to search for his friends who might be in trouble.
Maybe keep it on your body. So that when I don't know. Yeah, just leave it at the house, bud. Just leave it at the house. Is Portly gonna tamper with it? Does he want all your stuff? Does he want your little cockle shell fountain thing? Yeah, he should have been dead, but he wasn't. Maybe that's me being overly dramatic, but if you fell into...
I thought the same thing.
Yeah, if you fell into an icy river at night...
You're dead. There's basically no hope.
Unless you're,
Maybe Pan protected him.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, he could have written that in. That could have been a whole thing.
It could have been. It actually would have made more sense than he just somehow survived.
Protector of little animals. And so everybody's got to start up a search party. And of course, we have a side story, or not of course, we have a side story with Toad wanting to be an aviator and being a little zit about it.
That actually cracked me up, though. We did skip over the beginning because, well, first we start with Vanessa Redgrave and her grandchildren again. They come to visit, and she says she has a winter story for them. But when she starts talking, she's talking about the summertime, where Toad is hosting Mole's nephew. And he's teaching him to play croquet, and then a plane flies over, and he's like glazing over, and he tells Nephew Mole, you better pack your bags. That cracked me up.
Which does not make sense. Like, you could take up flying and still have him off in the library or whatever.
I should also mention, though, too, I wrote it down because I thought you would be interested. Nephew Mole is voiced by Adrian Scarborough, who I'm not very familiar with, but he voiced Benjamin Bunny in The World of Peter Rabbit and Friends.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Not old Mr. Bouncer, but young Benjamin.
He was in a lot of British series, so I know I've either heard or seen him in other things, but there was nothing where I was like, that's where I know him from. Like he was in a random episode of Doctor Who or something, so I know I've seen him, but he wasn't ever a main character in something.
More recognizable to me. The guy helping him with flying was being so nice. Trying to flatter him and keep him from killing himself or something.
Yeah, with the search party, they see Toad fly overhead, because you have this whole thing with Toad. He's not allowed to fly the airplane himself. I don't know. They must need a pilot's license or something. And also he hasn't had any training, so he's got this pilot, and he's telling him that he needs people to see him flying his plane. So they come up with this thing where the pilot's going to be like duck down out of sight or something, so that Toad can be the only one visible. So they see Toad fly over and decide that they're going to get him to help search for Mole, which is actually very logical, because that would be a much better way than just searching on foot. I should also say they recruited all the Wildwood animals because...
We're going to have a search party.
I was like, I wouldn't trust these people. But I guess they threatened them into helping and promised them a party also. Also, I don't know if this is supposed to be a character from the book, but it seemed like Badger had a little hedgehog servant.
Which is not in the... I mean, in the book you have the two hedgehogs that were on their way to school that end up at his house having breakfast. But they're not his servants.
I couldn't figure out if they were supposed to be his servants or not, or this one at least seemed to be helping, but he never said anything, and he was just kind of there. So I was like, okay, did Badger get a servant sometime in the past couple of years between movies?
You never know. And this is where I started to get, like, mad. Because Toad was more concerned about showing off and getting his own way, and didn't really seem to care about Mole, which you can try and write that off as he maybe doesn't understand how serious the situation is. But he was being so obnoxious. It's like somebody needs to step on him and end it. Just kill the Toad. Kill the Toad.
Sarah's murderous side comes out.
This was ridiculous. He wants to be messing around up in the sky, being obnoxious, after he's taken the clothes from the other aviator who actually knows what he's doing.
I will say, though, the scene where he tricks him into going into that little shed and you just have the silhouette of the Toad jumping on his head. That was probably my biggest laugh of the entire movie.
That's good you enjoyed that.
There was a lot about Toad's antics that, devoid of the context of him being a selfish jerk, cracked me up.
You might have actually enjoyed it when you were 12 or something.
Probably. That probably would have helped me enjoy this movie more now if I'd had nostalgia blinders to put on. But since I didn't know this one existed until I started researching for the podcast, I don't have the nostalgia blinders on. So I can only say that Toad sometimes made me laugh, but for the most part, this was a much reverted and even worse Toad than the first movie.
Yes, no, he needed to die. But I'm glad that you were probably laughing at stuff that I wasn't, where I was just sitting there feeling frustrated. And then then you have Rat falling out of the plane. Is it just me, or did that just feel... I mean, in real life it would be drawn out, but it's like, he's falling and falling and falling.
It seemed like they were trying to do, maybe not recreate the thing with Pan, but sort of give Rat, I don't know, a spiritual experience. Like he had a near-death experience or something.
Like he had seen the afterlife and nobody wanted to listen to him, and that was pretty much it.
And also he had the scene where he's like sitting on the riverbank communing with the river or something.
Yeah.
Which, when that happened, I was like, okay, I guess that sort of tracks from his attitude from the first one.
Yeah.
But then the near-death experience was like, okay, whatever. It seemed weird, but also Pan was in the first movie, so I shouldn't think too hard about it.
Yeah, that's less out there to have the near-death experience of seeing the animal afterlife, which, however fanciful you want to be for the story.
I should also say, too, I completely forgot when we're talking about the pilot. The pilot is voiced by Mike Grady, who played Barry on The Last of the Summer Wine.
Really? Oh, that did not register.
It didn't to me until I looked him up.
Barry. Oh, Barry.
And also, Chief Weasel was voiced by Mark Lockyer, who played Peter Rabbit in The World of Beatrix Potter and Friends.
Really?
He's a versatile actor.
How many years were between those two roles?
Like 2?
What the heck?
He's a versatile actor.
Did he go through puberty between them, or what happened?
I don't know. That's just what it said on, I think, IMDb.
I'm vaguely confused. Because he has a boy, not a man voice, but a boy voice for Peter Rabbit. And I'm assuming, and I can't remember the Chief Weasel's voice now, but I'm assuming that it's nothing like...
Well, the episode that he voices Peter Rabbit in is not the story of Peter Rabbit. It's the tale of Mr. Todd. Is he an adult in that?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, no, he'd grown up and he was helping Benjamin Bunny, whose babies had been kidnapped by a badger. Mr. Badger.
Okay. A different Mr. Badger.
Yes. A bad Mr. Badger. Well, an animal, you know.
But yeah, after Rat is dumped out of the plane, everyone is understandably basically enraged at Mr. Toad, and they're all shouting, "You can go hang." And then they kind of not forget about him, but they don't bother going to look for him because he ends up crashing.
It should be noted that Rat did have a parachute that he finally pulled
Yes.
at some point.
Yes. Thankfully, he had the presence of mind to put that on either before they took off or maybe he found it in the plane. Either way, he knew he needed it.
Eventually, after he'd fallen and fallen, over probably not that great of a height on the English countryside, but okay.
Anyways, Toad ends up crashing in a greenhouse. I don't remember where the plane ends up, but everybody talks about it like the pilot saved the town by crashing where he did. So the plane doesn't end up in the greenhouse, but Toad ends up in the greenhouse.
Which is a magnificent greenhouse.
Yeah, it's like full of jungle plants. It looked like a really cool place to visit.
Yes. And I kind of liked the way they had, you know, you have the, apparently belongs to the judge, so okay, enter the judge again. And isn't a cleric with him and somebody else?
Yeah, I don't remember who his other friend was.
I like how they have it, like the guy is trying to identify creatures
Yes.
in the conservatory or the greenhouse, and he's up there sort of swiveling around.
Yeah, he also had a parachute, but now he's trapped in a tree in the greenhouse, just kind of flailing and not able to move. But I liked the way they were talking about how he must have large creatures in the greenhouse to fertilize the plants. And Toad hears this, not knowing they're talking about him, and he freaks out thinking there's something that could eat him. And he has a line about it being better to die in a dungeon than eaten alive by whatever's in this greenhouse. So he starts yelling for help, telling them that he's a pilot who had an accident, and then they think he's a local hero who made sure that his plane didn't crash into the town.
But he insists that he has to keep on his aviation clothes, otherwise he'll somehow die or something, so that he won't be recognized by the judge.
His explanation for that made so little sense because he's like, it's for health, oxygen in the blood, you know. It's like, okay, and the judge just buys this.
In this world, yes.
Meanwhile, through all this, obviously Mole is not dead. He's somehow survived, which still makes not relatively little sense, but okay, whatever. There's
a boat had slipped away from Rat and all of them somehow.
that scene. That was one where I first raised my eyes and was like, okay, well, Rat just forgets to tie up his boat. That seems very out of character for Rat. But then I was like, well, he lost his friend, so he's not thinking straight. But yeah, this boat he lost earlier in the movie now makes its way to Mole so that he can have a way back to his friends. But meanwhile, for some reason, this is still like the very next day, Badger goes to find Rat after he falls out of the airplane and basically just says, we need to plan a funeral for Mole. I was like, they jumped straight from Mole got lost last night to he's dead, we need to hold a funeral.
Which honestly is probably fairly realistic in that setting.
It just seemed so quick. It was like the next day. It was like, well, that's it.
Disney princess marriage quick.
Kind of. So they basically jump straight to a funeral, and you have Badger giving the eulogy, and you've got Portly there upset, saying this is all his fault, which
kind of.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of, like, not totally, but kind of is.
So he's kind of wandering off, apparently eating a cracker to soothe his wounded spirit. And
it's understandable.
Mole comes ashore in Rat's rowboat with a sheet on him for whatever reason.
Maybe it was a tarp for the boat.
Maybe.
But he looks like a ghost.
Yes, exactly. So, Portly panics and runs back to the funeral where everybody panics, except for Badger, who was like ordering the spirit to leave so they can finish the funeral.
And
then,
seems fairly in character.
And then Mole reveals himself and everyone's relieved he's not dead.
And isn't he hungry?
Yes. Meanwhile, Toad is now recuperating at the judge's house, taking full advantage of lavish meals.
I hated the way he treated... hate is a strong word. Hate is a strong word. I did not like the way he treated the butler. He was so obnoxious.
Yes. I thought that I maybe recognized Prendergast's voice. I looked him up and I saw his face on IMDb and I was like, he does look vaguely familiar. So I started going through all the lines. This is Peter Sellier, or maybe Sellier. He played the Major on Keeping Up Appearances.
Was that the one who was always chasing after Hyacinth?
Yes.
Oh my.
Apparently he was only in 3 episodes. I could have sworn he was in more than that.
Very memorable. Didn't she want to befriend him because he had status?
Yes.
And then
she could not stand him, but he had status, so she put up with him. I don't know how long he stays in bed, but it's at least a day, and you finally have the judge sending Prendergast up to insist that he come down to dinner so they can properly reward him for his heroism. And he doesn't want to do this because they'll figure out who he is. So he comes up with this harebrained scheme, which is like I don't know how he figured out that this was going to work. It's almost Rube Goldbergian in the way he put this together. He blocks up the fireplace so that Prendergast will get a chimney sweep. So then the chimney sweep can come in there and he can get the sweep drunk so that he can steal his clothes and escape. So they just assume that this is the pilot still injured. And everybody thinks he's this magnificent fallen hero. And now Toad is furious that someone would take his glory. So he blows his own cover.
So stupid.
This is another thing where it made me laugh with how dumb it was, even though for the story, Toad should not be acting like this because he should be more reformed than this.
There should be more fear and trepidation and just getting out of there.
Yes. So then you've got everybody chasing him, and he steals a bike and rides on down the road, and he finds a house and is taken in by a woman who briefly mistakes him for her husband.
He stole the chimney sweep's bike. She thinks that he's the chimney sweep.
But how did he find the chimney sweep's house? Like, how did he know? Like, it kind of made no sense that he would just happen to steal the chimney sweep's clothes and bike, and everybody thinks he's the chimney sweep, and then he finds himself at the chimney sweep's house, and now his own wife thinks that the Toad is the chimney sweep briefly, until she gets a better look at his face. It seemed too convoluted and convenient.
I mean, it's fan fiction, so he can do it
exactly. I kept thinking that with stuff like this would happen. I was like, this really is just fan fiction. So, while Toad is wandering the woods, everybody is planning on working on this party that Badger had promised the weasels. They end up going to Toad Hall to borrow some stuff.
I think my mind disconnected from the promised party and them actually having the promised party. It's like, okay, they're having a party.
They find that the house is now flooded due to a burst pipe, and basically the place is trashed. Ratty finds a letter with an American postmark for Toad, so he picks it up to save it for him. But then everybody else decides that he's dead, and now they're going to hold this party in his memory.
It's the death wind in the willows.
Apparently.
Everybody's sort of dying, but not really.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Toad now finds himself at a wedding where he's still dressed as a chimney sweep. And apparently, sweeps is good luck at weddings, as someone says.
Are they really?
I don't know. I feel like I've heard that before, so maybe that's some sort of old superstition. So he decides to just lean into this chimney sweep thing. He's talking himself up, completely unaware that the groom is the son of the judge. Another convenience for this story.
Well, and then the daughter is what, the sheriff's daughter or something?
I think commissioner. The priest had a line about no hope for criminals now, no clemency, hang them all, and like the camera zooming in on his face.
Oh boy. And Toad was so obnoxious at this wedding. He was wanting to steal the camera's attention.
Yeah, he's posing for pictures with the family when the wife from the night before bursts in, screaming that he's pretending to be her missing husband, which alerts the judge, who turns around and spots him, and he's now finally caught. So then you get a line from Vanessa Redgrave saying that winter is ending with no news of Toad. It is now spring, and Badger is reading the paper and finds a story about Toad. Apparently everyone thinks he murdered the chimney sweep. Which just...
Because why not?
At that point, I was like, what? The chimney sweep was last seen drunkenly stumbling around the judge's house. You would think that they would know where the chimney sweep was. Why is the judge prosecuting Toad for the murder of a man who is living in his own house?
Ish.
So Badger tells everybody about this, and Rat says something like Toad is incapable of murder. And I liked that Badger chimed in, manslaughter, perhaps.
Would that be like accidentally?
Kind of.
Oh, he's fully capable of that.
And Rat also points out that there's no mention in the article of his airplane. So really, the thing that he is in trouble for is murder, which is so ridiculous. So, for some reason, Badger decides he needs to help Toad. I don't know why.
I mean, going to jail for murder is rather serious, so if he can help
That's
him at
true.
all.
That's true. So, he writes a letter to an old friend of his, the editor of The Times, which is apparently a huge deal. I'm guessing it's not the New York Times. It must be a different Times.
The London Times.
So, Toad ends up in court, where he is basically manipulated into giving up his rights to a lawyer, and he pleads guilty to all 116 charges.
Were all of the people he was facing rather homely obnoxious? Like,
Yes.
the way they drew them?
Yes.
Whatever weird skin tone they wanted to give them?
Yes. At this point, he actually finally seems like he's sorry for everything. And he's crying and confessing to having abandoned the search for Mole and possibly killed Ratty. Because I don't think he even really knows if Ratty survived the fall. So apparently...
It took a while for that conscience to kick in.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, he went through all this stuff, and he's now looking back at the events of that day. He's like, oh yeah, I think I might have killed my friend. Forgot about that while I was scarfing chicken in bed.
You gotta give him credit for whatever he's managed to... Oh, man.
So all of his confessions confuse the court because nothing he is confessing to is what they have as his charges. They have no idea what he's talking about. And the judge accuses him of impersonating a pilot in order to steal his silver. Which,
what have these people been taking?
I don't know. This, of course, infuriates Toad because he insists he is a pilot and he has plenty of silver of his own. Thank you very much. And I don't remember exactly what he says. It was something like telling him to go to the devil or something, which basically seals his fate. He's done for. But then suddenly a letter from the Times editor is delivered in the middle of court proceedings for whatever reason. It's all so contrived. This letter reveals that both he and Badger are vouching for the Toad's good character. And then Prendergast shows up and testifies on Toad's behalf.
Prendergast, who he had given money to previously, so...
I suppose that's why, even though he mistreated him.
May have had something to do, probably a lot to do with that.
Yeah. But then Prendergast also reveals that the person he has supposedly murdered is actually alive and working for the judge as a chef in his kitchen and has taken up with the housekeeper, the widow Coggins. And the wife of the missing man is in court and screams, "If he's alive, I'll murder him!" I was like, what is this movie?
Yeah.
Basically, after this, Prendergast reminds everybody that Toad saved the town, even if it was an accident. And then somehow he's just completely pardoned for everything.
Well, the judge was acting like he wouldn't get reelected or wouldn't get some promotion or something if he didn't let him off. There's some little mumbled, I think, about that. And yeah.
So then, apparently, the party is only just now finally happening. So this is like months later. It's like it took a really long time to put this party together. And you've got the Weasels talking about Toad being seen wandering in rags, completely barmy. And Badger insists it's not their Toad. And then the Chief Weasel's like steals a spoon or something, and Badger chases him out. That made me laugh, just the way they animated him grab one. And then you've got the scene of Toad finally returning to Toad Hall, horrified to find everything in ruins. I loved his line, "My sofa!"
Yes.
And it showed off my legs so well.
Yes, that might have been the thing that I found the most amusing in this whole movie. I was not expecting that line.
And then you've got him sobbing about having nothing, and he'll be reduced to working at the poorhouse or something. And then he finds a tin of biscuits and a bottle of wine and a candle, and suddenly cheers up, I guess because he at least has something. And meanwhile, the party is apparently boring and dull, and Badger reluctantly tells Portly that he can put on his newfangled tunes. "Fetch me my earplugs." And Portly looks overjoyed and puts on ragtime music. I liked that was the newfangled tunes that he needed earplugs for.
Yeah, that seems rather fitting with that character. He was trying to have a funeral dinner, in a sense, or at least he was trying to have a moment, like one song.
I guess maybe that is why the party was dull, because he did say it was like in memory of Toad, even though they've found out that he's still alive. I don't know.
Okay. Maybe Badger just wanted to insist that he was dead.
He's dead to him.
I don't know.
Even though he vouched for him.
And this is where it got even more ridiculous.
Yeah. You have Toad on his balcony, hearing the music from the party, assuming everybody hates him, gets drunk, knocks over a candle, and sets the entire mansion on fire.
This is good for kids. This is how to deal with problems. Always be arrogant and drink too much. And play with fire. No.
So everybody goes over and try to rescue him. Like, most everybody's standing below him with, like, a big sheet or something to catch him.
But he's so cowardly that he won't, even though the flames are about to consume him.
I don't know that he's cowardly. I think he's just arrogant again, because he's, like, resigned himself to death and says he'd sooner fry.
What? Because of his poverty?
I think it's just a combination of him being drunk, thinking everybody hates him. He's lost everything. I think he's just ready to be done with life.
But that's great. Okay.
But Rat and Mole sneak in through the secret entrance and go up and shove him off the balcony to safety.
As good friends do.
Yes. So then everything is burning. Toad says he has no insurance. It's a waste of money.
In line with his good sense so far this movie.
So basically he has literally nothing. But then, magically, the letter that Ratty found earlier in the movie.
Because his good character beggars redemption.
The letter says his American cousin Bufo has died and left him $5 million.
And he really stops to mourn for cousin Bufo. Without gleefully skipping straight to all the money he's just gotten. Ha ha.
So that everybody's like celebrating as Toad Hall collapses into ashes. The
end. Pretty much.
So then we go back to Vanessa Redgrave and her grandchildren as they finish their tea and they have to leave. And then you get more voiceover over the credits. And then, I don't know if you stayed to watch, but there was a brief after credit scene where she's like dancing and singing about Toad.
I did watch it. Gonna give me a pat on the back.
I wasn't expecting an after credit scene of this movie. I thought maybe there would be like a line or something. I was waiting for another line from Edward talking about a sequel.
Oh no. So yeah, definitely recommend. Yeah, the watching this once was enough. I watched the first one twice, and I would watch it again. It was lovely. Mm-hmm. But this one was. It's one of those where I felt frustrated watching it. Mm-hmm. I was getting so irritated and frustrated watching it. And it's not the end of the world, but every once in a while I'll see a plot line where I just feel frustrated. And it would be nicer if I was just laughing over it, but I wasn't doing as much of that as I could have.
No, it was frustrating is a good word, but I don't know, there was something about the way Toad acted that did make me laugh a lot.
That's good, because I think it just mostly frustrated me and I wanted him dead. Not the whole time, but...
I would have preferred if they had written it more in line with the ending of the first one, with him trying to reform instead of completely reverting him back even worse than his pre-motor car self.
Like, with these characters, there is room for fan fiction. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was only one book, but they have such interesting little personalities, and it's a whole world.
And I could buy that Toad gets obsessed with something, even if he's reformed. I definitely could buy him getting obsessed with airplanes.
But they totally could have had his character develop even more to where he's actually something besides obnoxious and pleasant. Mm-hmm. Like, say, Badger gets injured or something and needs to be rescued, and Toad actually makes himself incredibly useful. Yeah. Or,
and doesn't beat up his pilot so that he can get all the glory for himself.
Or developing, or having little bird characters, or all sorts of... I'm sure there are all sorts of things that you could do with this besides killing everybody off, but not killing them off and burning Toad Hall down. And having people get drunk and carry on with the house help and whatever. Mm-hmm.
Even if they'd had him do the full reversion to being obnoxiously awful, I still think they could have saved the ending by not having him just get bailed out at the end by the mysterious dead cousin. Just have him lose everything, because that's more interesting.
And just have like a little cottage where he lives peacefully and actually learns to be content and enjoy life quietly.
Yeah.
Or maybe he could take to sea. There were options. Mm-hmm. And there you have it. It burned down, he got a lot of money, and oh boy.
Okay, well, that's all for that one.
You've been told.
Do you want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you?
I am Turnip Wilson on Redbubble. I have things on other sites, but that's where I have the bulk of my artwork, where you can see little whimsical animals and vintage style illustration and be in line with these type of stories. All right.
Okay. Well, we will see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Disney Movie Marathon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-host as well. My Linktree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.